Michael's heart was pounding as he rushed toward the people. He yelled and waved, doing his best to get their notice. He hadn't given permission for any of this. The person cutting the tree stopped and gave him a phone. Emma and Michael were married and lived near Nashville, Tennessee. They had recently moved and wanted to make some small changes to make their home unique. Many houses in the area looked similar, and they had lots of trees in their yard. They really liked the oak trees in their yard, which was one of the reasons they bought the house. However, there were also many mulberry trees among the oaks, and these trees blocked the sunlight. So they decided to ask for quotes from different companies to remove these mulberry trees. The trouble started when they began receiving quotes to remove the mulberry trees that blocked their sunlight. They were offered a lot of money to cut down these trees, but they liked the privacy the oak trees provided in their backyard, so they didn't want to remove them. Michael didn't think much about the request initially, but he should have. You see, their neighbor had recently spent a lot of money on his front porch, which had a fire pit, hanging lights, a jacuzzi, and a pizza oven. He had renovated the porch just before Emma and Michael moved in, and he had a favor to ask of them. Michael wouldn't be lying if he wasn't a little jealous, but there was a problem to his new addition. Michael's neighbor would regularly spend his afternoons after work lying in his jacuzzi. But there was a problem. The oak trees that Michael and his wife loved so much had the opposite effect on their neighbor. The oak trees would block out the sun and leave his jacuzzi in the shade. And so it happened that their neighbor owned a tree felling business and asked if he could have a look at the job. He was there for more than just the quote. Michael was just hoping that he would charge less than all the other companies were, but he had no idea what his neighbor's true intentions were. While Michael was out of town, he said that he would drop a quote off in the mail, but it seemed that he never would. Michael knew nothing about cutting trees, so he thanked his neighbor for his time. All of this was new to him, so he appreciated the help. But just 1 week later, Michael was seeing red. He would be shouting at the stranger he found in his yard. What was going on? They'd gotten back home from their trip to find a terrible sight. Michael's wife had to rush back to work, so it was only him who noticed what was going on while they were away. Michael was confused. He'd just gotten back and heard the sound of machinery. He went to the source, the backyard. There were diggers and trucks in his yard. He saw that it was his neighbor's company logo on the side of them. Then he realized what was going on. They had already started to cut down trees at the end of his backyard, and not just the one they wanted gone. No, they had already cut down a number of their beloved trees. Michael's heart raced as he busted through the doors and ran down to them, shouting at them to stop. He waved frantically as his voice was drowned out by the loud machinery. One worker saw Michael sprinting toward him and immediately shut off his engine when he understood what he said. He immediately hopped out and waved at his crew to stop what they were doing. Michael looked around at the devastation and angrily asked who had given them the permission. He replied that they'd been told to chop down these trees by their boss, his neighbor. Michael briefly surveyed the damage and felt like crying. His yard was now mashed grass, stomped on flower beds, and fallen branches. Amid it all, the barren and sawn-off stumps where his beautiful oaks had once stood. Michael began to fume. He couldn't believe that his neighbor had done this. Michael, intensely confused, told him that he never agreed to work taking place here. Immediately, the worker rang his boss, Michael's neighbor, and handed him the phone. After a heated short conversation, they hung up. The workers left his property, and Michael was left with huge fallen trees and debris scattered around his yard. This was just the beginning. Michael stewed about what to do next. There was nothing he could do. The trees were gone, carelessly sawn down to a row of dead stumps. He tried to confront his unbelievable neighbor, but he was lying low, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Then, to add insult to injury, he found a note that his neighbor slid underneath the front door. When Michael read the note, he was incensed. He took to Reddit to ask for some anonymous advice. When I returned from vacation last week, I came home to 2 tree stumps, smashed up grass, and a note telling me to expect a Venmo payment for $2,000. Michael angrily explained in a Reddit post. His neighbor really thought that throwing money at the problem would make it go away. When Michael's wife came home, she was devastated that her beloved trees were gone, and she hated not being able to see the cars passing on the busy road that hid behind her old trees. The next day, they wanted to sort this out with their neighbor, but there was a problem. The trees that were cut down and left messily on their land had slid onto the busy road after a night of heavy rainfall. They woke up to the cops knocking on their door. They were informed that the trees were their responsibility, so they would need to pay for the expense of the city moving these massive trees. They explained the situation, and with Michael's wife being a lawyer, she was able to calmly and effectively avoid blame and responsibility for this. But that's when things got interesting. Michael's Reddit post attracted a number of comments in just a few days. Many users were just as stumped as he was, but then one of them advised him to repost his question on another thread called Tree Law. He scrolled through that particular Reddit thread and couldn't believe what he was reading. Michael had no idea that there were lawyers who specialized in arboreal arbitration. Tree law is anything that you can imagine that might give rise to disputes between people concerning trees, says Barry Bonaparte, a California tree lawyer. Shortly after he moved his post to the new thread, everyone was telling him to get an arborist in ASAP. It turned out that Michael could do something about his audacious neighbor after all. After weeks of back and forth and growing annoyance at the loss of their beautiful trees, Michael finally had a plan. They ended up hiring an arborist or tree doctor to determine the value of the trees they lost as a way to get their neighbor to admit his wrongdoings and pay up. Redditors on the Tree Law Reddit thread waited for an update from Michael with bated breath. I'd assure you we're all anxiously awaiting how many zeros are in the estimate that the arborist gives you, so you must promise frequent update posts, one user wrote. Who doesn't love a good bit of well-deserved justice? Salivated another. And when he did, everyone lost their mind. To the couple's astonishment, their trees were valued at a ridiculously high price, as they were rare oak trees that took hundreds of years to grow. They then hired an attorney and equipped him with all the knowledge they gained from the tree doctor and the overhanging bill left by the council to clean up the road. They told him they could ask his neighbor's companies for a lot of money because of what his neighbor did. They sued for $1.2 million to pay for all the problems caused by this incident, like paying the lawyers, cleaning up the road, and the value of the very old trees he cut down. The neighbor said his business couldn't pay and closed it. He sold his house and left the town. Michael and his wife didn't have to give any money. It will take a while, maybe many months, maybe until September, because they only started the process recently because of the holidays. Michael said he will have all 12 trees back on his property without paying anything. He thanked everyone for their advice and said he didn't know they were also interested in trees, but he's happy they are.